Hi there, welcome. This is the Kelly's Astrology podcast, where you can find insight, guidance, and understanding through astrology. I'm Kelly, and I'll be your host. Hi there, everyone, and welcome. I've got two topics that I want to share about in today's episode. I'm going to talk briefly about the sun moving into Leo, and then I'm going to dive into a little bit of an overview of Venus retrograde. Before I do, I wanted to mention my astrology training program. So if you're a beginner or intermediate student, or if you're looking for more in-depth training in astrology, my 2-year astrology program can help you grow. If you want to deepen your understanding of yourself, if you want to better understand how astrology works, or if you want to develop your skills with astrology so you can share astrology with others in your own practice, I'd invite you to start learning today. Pop over to kellysastrology.com and click on the Learn Astrology option in the main menu. Once you do that, in the top left, you'll see the heading Astrologer Training Program. Take a few minutes to explore the different courses and topics that are included. And if you spot one that fits what you need, you can sign up today. So with that said, let's move on to this week's astrology. We are looking at the week starting Saturday, July 22nd, and that's an important day for two reasons, and that's what we're going to talk about in our show today. So on July 22nd, we have the sun moving into Leo. That'll happen if you're in Canada and the US on the 22nd. If you're in other parts of the world like Europe, the UK, or Australia, the sun in Leo cycle will begin on the 23rd. So why am I talking about the sun in Leo? This is actually one of my favorite transits that I look forward to each year. The sun is super strong and really solar, really vitalizing in Leo. So this 4-week period, the sun in Leo season, is a really strengthening, vitalizing time. The sun in Leo boosts strength and confidence, and it can help you with taking charge of really important matters, sort of stepping into that role of leader. Leo does represent the archetype of the leader, the regal lion, the head of the pack, and figureheads in general. The sun is known as the most consistent planet in astrology. It's consistent and steady in the way it moves and the way it expresses its light. And with the sun then being in its home sign of Leo, it makes it a really positive indication for stability and consistency. So you can use these next 4 weeks, the sun in Leo season, to help establish routines and to build consistency into your life. If you want to calm things down, if you want to kind of stabilize different areas, that's what the sun in Leo can really help with as well. To make this an even more fortunate placement, there's a couple of things about the sun in Leo in 2023 that are important. So this year with the sun in Leo, it isn't dealing with any extra pressure or restraint from Saturn. Remember that in 2021 and 2022, when the sun was in Leo, Saturn was in the opposing sign in Aquarius. And so in the last couple of years, the sun in Leo season has been a little bit restrained or a little bit dampened down. So this year, though, that isn't the case. And the sun in Leo in 2023 has this like even brighter, more radiant quality. So this 4-week season can really encourage you to shine and radiate your light and your essence out into your life even stronger than usual. And, kind of compounding the good, the sun in Leo in 2023 also does not have to deal with any irritations or distractions from Mars either. Mars is in Virgo while the sun is in Leo, and that's not a place that planets make a traditional aspect between. So one way I'm thinking about sun in Leo 2023 is to invite all of us in this next 4-week period to refocus attention on the good that you want to amplify or the quality that you want to enjoy in this 4-week period. Those large or small challenges that we have symbolized, by Mars and Saturn, it's not as though they've gone away, and I'm not asking you to turn a blind eye or ignore important things, but with the sun looking in a different direction at the moment, You might be able to enjoy a break from the usual pressures of life, or you might enjoy a period of respite or even just a moment of pause and breather if you are in a more challenging situation. So the sun moving into Leo is always considered to be a vitalizing cycle. So this is a great time to work with and look forward to every year. But in 2023, the sun in Leo is especially vibrant and vital and radiant because it doesn't have these interactions from Mars or Saturn. So we've all got until August 23 to make the most of the sun in Leo. So kind of go forth and shine as bright as you like in this time frame. I wanted to mention the sun in Leo as it is such a helpful placement, and especially so this year. But of course, the biggest astro news of this week, this last part of July, is of course Venus retrograde. And we could think of Venus retrograde as a time to make over certain parts or topics or areas of our life. So here's the highlights of what you need to know about Venus retrograde. It is a 6-week cycle. It is starting on July 22nd and it will continue until September 3rd. Venus will be reversing. Retrograde means reversing or moving backwards. And the part of the sky we're seeing this technically apparent backward motion. We're seeing Venus go backwards from 28 Leo to 12 degrees of Leo. So that part of Leo from 12 to 28 Leo is the retrograde zone, if you like. And so what are some of the key concepts or highlights of Venus retrograde? The main themes are that Venus retrograde is a time to reevaluate Venus things. So what are the Venus things that we're reevaluating? Use Venus retrograde to reevaluate the place of desire and pleasure in your life, to reassess connection and enjoyment and relationships. And you're also going to be sort of reviewing the place of beauty, the place of leisure, delight in your life. So Venus does represent a lot of these things that bring sweetness into our lives. And so when Venus is retrograde, those things don't go away, but we might be questioning and exploring the best ways to have pleasure and connection in our life. What are going to be more satisfying types of relationships or friendships? How do we encounter beauty and make time for those kind of artful, kind of pleasant experiences? You're probably gathering by now, Venus isn't connected to the necessities of life. These are all kind of fun things, but they can be really fundamental in the helpful impact that they have. So, Venus retrograde. Now, I sometimes hear from students and clients that they're very worried about this cycle, like it is a bad thing, or, what is it going to mean for me or for my chart? And one of the important things to keep in mind is that Venus retrograde is definitely a unique feature of the current time that we're in, but it's not going to have it's not going to be the most important thing for all of us astrologically. So when students ask me or clients ask me, how much is this Venus retrograde going to impact me? Sometimes the answer is it's not really going to have an impact for you personally a lot, because there may be other things in your chart that are more significant. So who is going to be most influenced by Venus retrograde? If you have planets or chart points like your ascendant or midheaven from 12 to 28 Leo, this Venus retrograde is going to be a little more important for you. It's going to strike something in your chart really directly. Just to give you an example, if your birthday is between August 5th and August 22nd, that means you'll have your sun in those degrees, and this Venus retrograde will go over the sun in your personal chart. But you might have the moon or Mercury, you could have Saturn or Pluto, Jupiter or Mars, you could have any of the planets in that 12 to 28 degree range in Leo, and that'll make this Venus retrograde a little more important for you. This Venus retrograde, or maybe we could say Venus retrogrades in general, will also be important for you if you have a Taurus or Libra ascendant, because those signs are ruled by Venus, or if you have a lot of planets in the signs of Taurus or Libra in your birth chart. And all of those Venus-ruled parts of your chart are going through their own review and update process through Venus retrograde. And the final piece that I always consider to think about, how important will Venus retrograde be for this person is if Venus is your annual time lord. So if you're working with the timing technique of perfections, that identifies one planet for each year of life that has a special significance for you. And if you're in a period in your life that is governed or guided or ruled by Venus, then of course, something like Venus retrograde will be a little bit more important for you at that point in time. So if those factors don't apply for you, then the Venus retrograde is part of the astro weather, but it may not be the most important thing for your personal chart. So that's something to keep in mind. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how to connect with and work with Venus retrograde, even if it's not directly striking your chart. But I did like to be clear about how Venus retrograde can have a varying level of influence on different charts and different people, depending on our own unique chart setup. So one way that I like to think about a planetary retrograde is as an emphasis or an intensity. Venus is going to spend 4 months in the sign of Leo instead of her usual 4 weeks. So Venus has been in Leo since early June and will be in Leo until early October. And her retrograde, this late July, August, and early September timeframe is kind of in the middle of that 4-week period. So Venus retrograde is really a chance or an invitation to go deeper around some topics and some key areas. The topics of any planets you have in Leo, if that's you, the topics of the things in your chart that are ruled by Venus. So your Taurus and Libra parts of your chart, for instance, and of course, the Leo house in our chart. That's going to be the most accessible place for all of us because we all have Leo on one house or another. And with the retrograde happening in Leo, it's going to really call our attention in deeper, more persistent ways to the topics of the Leo part of our chart. So a Venus retrograde cycle is really about reevaluating. It's reevaluating your desires and your sense of enjoyment in important relationships, and particularly around the topics of the Leo part of your birth chart. Relationships is not just romantic in this sense. You might question or reassess your friendships, family relationships, work partnerships, and of course, a romantic involvement as well. As you're reassessing, that might mean that you could be reactivating, reconnecting, or rekindling connections that have become distant that you would like to be close again. Or you might be acknowledging as you're reassessing, you might acknowledge that your affections have changed. The things that you enjoy, the types of people that you want to spend time with, that has shifted. And you might acknowledge that you are happy to let some connections fade away. Those of you who are in my membership will have heard me talk about how Venus in Leo has standards. We have Venus retrograde every 18 months in just one of 5 different zodiac signs. And so the Venus in Leo signature is very much about raising our standards and expressing these new desires as we are coming to know about them. And so resetting patterns and behaviors in your relationships to better honor these kind of new standards is going to be an important part of this Venus retrograde cycle. Venus in Leo is really expressive. So as you're learning these new things, as you're reflecting and resurrecting things that you'd forgotten, but that you do really enjoy, or as you're giving yourself permission to let things go that you no longer enjoy, you're going to want to express and share about that. So that's important to keep in mind. Now, aside from relationships, Venus retrograde can influence, other topics and areas in our chart. And I've mentioned that this Venus retrograde is really going to affect the topics of the Leo house or the Leo area in our chart. And so think about the Leo part of your chart. Think about that as an area of your life that is ripe for renewal and ready for a makeover. And that does apply to all of us. You don't have to have planets in Leo for this to be important. And so, if you have Leo in the 11th house of friendship, this Venus retrograde might be hugely about renewing and reassessing, reorganizing your experiences around friendships if Leo is 11th house for you. You might be re-exploring or reconnecting with themes to do with service and spirituality and retreat if you have Leo on the 12th house. So we're bringing that kind of reevaluation of Venus retrograde into the topics of the Leo part of your chart. So really consider how Venus retrograde in Leo might invite you to update and set new standards about your experiences and interactions around the Leo house topics in your chart. One other important point to keep in mind with Venus retrograde is that Venus is retrograde specifically in Leo every 8 years. So we've actually all had this cycle before, and we're all going to have it again, probably many times. So this particular Venus retrograde in July, August, and early September 2023 reflects back and links to the Venus retrograde cycle in July, August, and early September of 2015. That was the last time that Venus was retrograde in Leo. And so there are echoes or sort of resonance or spider web-like threads of mid-2015 that connect to mid-2023. And we might see this in terms of social and cultural topics and themes that were really important in the middle of 2015 that are coming up again in slightly different ways, but sort of similar territory in the middle of 2023. So that's something to keep in mind. And when you're thinking about Venus retrograde for yourself, do think back to that mid-2015 period. What was going on for you then? What events were happening? What new standards were you bringing in? What new standards were you thinking about that you didn't bring in that you're actually going to make more of an effort to do so this time around? I've mentioned that Venus retrograde is going to have an impact on Taurus and Libra, the signs in the zodiac ruled by Venus. And so the more important the signs Taurus and Libra are in your personal chart, then the more important it will be to watch what happens with Venus. So for instance, just to give an example of this past week, I had 2 clients that are both Libra rising or Libra ascendant charts. And so Venus is their ascendant ruling planet and really important in the context of their chart. And so whatever Venus is doing in their natal chart is really important, but also whatever's happening with Venus in the sky becomes really important because that is the planet that really represents them in the context of their chart and life. So part of this Venus retrograde for each of those Libra rising clients, and this would apply to Taurus rising clients as well, part of this Venus retrograde is going to be about personal growth and self-development because the planet that rules their ascendant and their first house is going to be in reverse. So moving backwards. And so they might reevaluate their sense of themselves. They might make changes regarding habits and behaviors, things that might influence their personality, for example. They might also experiment with different styles of presenting or dress or fashion, interacting with the world, like a change of hairdo or a different dress style, wearing different colors or different styles of clothes. Now, don't get me wrong, Venus retrograde is usually not the time to make any permanent or major changes to your appearance, anything that you can't easily undo or change again. We wouldn't do in Venus retrograde. But if Venus retrograde is connected to your first house, maybe you have a Leo rising or you have one of the Venus signs on the ascendant, Taurus or Libra, you might be feeling like you want to refresh your image or your look or your style, your appearance in some way. So experiment with options that are easy to change, different kinds of clothing, maybe different hairstyles or different makeup, that type of thing. So you can also think about the Taurus and Libra parts of your birth chart as undergoing a bit of a makeover during Venus retrograde. You could think about this as though, Venus retrograde is a time where the Leo part of our chart and the Taurus and Libra parts of our chart are being reevaluated. Technically, from her place in Leo, while Venus is in Leo, she does make aspects to Taurus and to Libra. So Venus in Leo makes a square connection to Taurus and a sextile connection to Libra. And so there really is a lot of support to review all 3 of these house areas and topics in your life in the coming weeks. So for those of you who are really familiar with your own chart, the Venus retrograde in Leo is kind of sparking off these updates and improvements about the Leo area of your life, but also about the Taurus and the Libra parts of your chart. So that's a little bit about how you can get quite chart specific with working with Venus retrograde. But I also wanted to share some general retrograde Venus themes as well. I mentioned at the start of the show, Venus is about pleasure, beauty, connection, enjoyment, and relaxation. And so in these next 6 weeks, it's going to be an invitation for you to really contemplate your relationship to pleasure and beauty and enjoyment and relaxation. Do you let yourself relax, or are you always worried about doing things and being productive? It's a little bit premature to say, we want to make more time for enjoyment and leisure. But if we don't know what we actually enjoy, then this Venus retrograde might need to be a bit of an experiment or a discovery process to uncover the hobbies or experiences or activities that really do feel enjoyable or relaxing for us. Remember, I said that Venus is not about necessity. She's not about productivity. She's not necessarily about ambition. She's about enjoyment. She's about those pleasurable things that we enjoy, passing time with a friend, enjoying a great cup of tea or a beautiful bottle of wine or a lovely meal. These things that don't necessarily help us get things done, but they enhance that quality of our life. That's what Venus really represents. And if you feel like you haven't got any of those moments of kind of enjoyment and quality and relaxation, either on your own, one of my favorite things to do is just curl up with a great book and have a few hours on the couch. I find that so enjoyable. Don't get me wrong, I love a nice meal with friends or to have a glass of wine or something, but there's different types of enjoyment and pleasure that we all have. And Venus is most generally about that. And so when we're thinking about general themes of Venus retrograde, it's about reviewing, reworking, and perhaps reactivating or cultivating your relationship with pleasure. And that can show up in a variety of areas. It can show up in your romantic life, in terms of emotional connection and pleasure. It can be physical connection and pleasure, but it can also be just you as a person in the world. How do you make time and space to enjoy the sweet life? So while Venus is retrograde, you might realize that you don't love something the way that you thought. And then you might love yourself so much that you give yourself permission to stop this thing that you've realized you don't actually love that much anyway. But conversely, you might also remember or reconnect with experiences that you once loved that you'd forgotten. There may also be that discovery component where you learn something new about what pleasure and leisure and connection really looks and feels like for you at this stage of life. Because what we enjoyed 8 years ago is probably different from what we enjoy now. Our life circumstances had changed. And so we want to give ourselves a chance to catch up to that. Now, one helpful date that I want to mention, and that's happening in this week, that will be helpful to kind of tuning into the ideas or the insights or the little curious threads that are worth following while Venus is retrograde is July 27th, when Mercury will be in Leo and connecting with Venus retrograde. And that's really going to help Venus retrograde say something. You'll get an idea, a piece of insight. You might have a moment of discovery. You might have a conversation that really helps you understand something about this pleasure, connection, romance, enjoyment piece in your life. And so mark that July 27th. It'll be July 28th if you're in Australia, but for most other places, it's July 27th. That's a really fun, helpful aspect for Venus retrograde. So while Venus is retrograde in Leo, you will have the chance to enhance the quality of both relationships and experiences in your life. So why not use this retrograde cycle to consider, reflect, reassess? You kind of deserve it. That it's like a beauty product years ago that had the tagline, you're worth it. And that really feels to me like the Venus in Leo tagline. I'm worth it. I deserve the consideration of what I most enjoy, so that when I have that leisure time, I'm really getting the kind of most rich and satisfying and fulfilling experience. So try out different experiences or expressions of affection. See what happens. That's how we learn and grow. I would love to hear how you're exploring or experiencing more enjoyable parts of your life with Venus retrograde in Leo. Let me know in the comments below. And if you are looking to take your understanding of astrology to a new level, I hope to see you in my astrology training program soon. You can find out more or sign up via kellysastrology.com. Thanks for listening, everyone, and I'll look forward to talking to you next week.